Hi everyone, this is Dragon GGY. This is the operator Hindsight for the delicious in dungeon collab 6-star Marcille. Let's dive in. Marcille is a 6-star splash caster in the caster class. Trait of the archetype, deals AoE arts damage, or to be specific, AoE splash damage. Splash caster is an old school archetype that was here from day one. They have a 1.1 splash radius, most of them, which is larger than the 1.0 of artillery and forges, as well as the 0.9 of flingers. However, as a trade-off, they come with a much smaller attack range of 3x3 tiles, which in my opinion is a pretty clear disadvantage to the other archetypes we mentioned. Overall, I say this archetype is in a bit of an awkward situation. They come with high DP costs, long attack interval, and the shortest attack range in casters, which all limited their performance. The previous 6-star members in this archetype, Marcille and Dusk, are mostly used for their utility. Marcille for her long duration, super slow crowd control after her incredible module, as well as her caster SP buff, and Dusk for her summon store with skill 3, which is something that's not very relevant outside of caster knights, and all this utility that we talk of, they have very little to do with the splash caster archetype itself. Let's take a look at Marcille's talents. Talent 1, skill consumes mana and can be activated anytime, or to be specific or more precise, can be activated anytime as long as mana meets the skill's requirement. Mana does not recover naturally, but instead recovers 1 point every second while not deployed. When there's 1 or more mana, gains attack plus 20%, 25% at potential 3, and the splash radius is increased from 1.1 to 1.5. So let's break down mana. TLDR, mana is just SP with some special characteristics, with the key takeaway here being it's a type of SP that has a recovery rate of 0 when on field and 1 when off field. That said, she can still gain SP from external sources when on field, for example, any flat SP regen increases like skill aura and SP relics. So if Marcille is in Talopsis range, she gets a natural SP recovery rate of 0.3 per second. Choose Force Ray talent, Liscom's charging talent, Senshi skill 2, the charging station that gives 3 SP every 4 seconds. All of those works on Marcille and will give her SP or mana even when she's on field. Is this really practical? Honestly, not really, but it's something worth noting. While on field, Marcille can still lose mana from the crosses, but not in skill where she's already locked in. She does not recover mana off field when she's being disabled by mechanics like the Sargas Devourers or the Cannibal Flowers in this event. For relation with skills, her max mana is always 80 regardless of the skill she's using, and that max mana, displayed as the SP requirement for skills, will not be altered by any SP requirement increase or reduction effects. The initial SP shown in skills are her initial mana when she enters the stage with that skill equipped. It is possible to see, although not in exact numbers, the mana that Marcille currently has when she's off field. It's indicated by a green outline that extends both sides from the bottom middle to the top middle of her character icon, and the motion displayed on screen right now. Each half of a sidebar is exactly 20 mana. I added the marker here as well, and when she hits full mana, her character icon will start to glow green. This talent is more about defining her mechanics, so let's talk about the pros and cons of mana as an alternative SP. It does fully make use of her time off field and partly made up for her high DP as a splash caster, so while she's waiting for enough DP to be deployed, she's also charging up her skill behind the scene for a faster startup. Basically, when she's not deployed, she's also doing what others can only do when they are deployed, if you get what I mean. She does not get affected by SP debuffs at all, and like we said, she basically needs 0 startup time given she's charged up off field. However, there is a big but here, which we will get to in just a bit. Cons, the mana system basically make her a one-off every time she's deployed, and practically speaking, she must redeploy to regain all the mana. This is most relevant with skill 3. On the flip side, she also doesn't benefit from any SP buffs. Again, charging her mana on field is just not the way to go. Overall though, I think mana is a unique and mostly beneficial mechanic that gives Marcille some distinct advantages. For buffs provided by this talent, splash radius increase is a very welcome bonus, helps with her skill 2 quite a lot. Talent 2, initial mana plus 25. When there are 4 Lyle's party operators in squad, all Lyle's party operators gain attack speed plus 25, defense plus 35%. For initial mana, it's mostly a QOL for when you want to deploy her earlier. Other than that, the party or faction buff is not a practical bonus because 1, it requires all of the party members to even be effective. 2, it's only effective towards the party members. And 3, the buffs aren't that good after all. Only Lyles and Chilchuk could make use of both attack speed and defense buffs, so it's mostly relatable if you love the whole cast and use them together in daily runs. Other than that, not very practical. Marcille also releases with her module Y. Trade update reduces DP by 8, which should make her 24 to 26 DP. Upgrades go to a talent 1, increasing her initial mana from 25 to 40. First of all, the base effect is, as always, very crucial for using splash casters. Cutting their DP by 1/4 is QOL, and also solidifies her advantage as a fast startup AFK candidate with skill 2. For upgrades, the attack speed increase in attribute will shorten her attack interval to 2.7 seconds at level 3. The 40 initial mana is more for deploying her even earlier, where she will start the stage with 65, 50 and 80 mana for all 3 skills respectively. Now, considering her DP and how you would usually approach starting a stage, the initial mana is more beneficial to using skill 2 than skill 3. In conclusion, base effect, QOL DP reduction. The attack speed attribute shortens the interval, but due to the additional attack speed bonus in skill 2, the increase from level 2 to level 3 becomes irrelevant, and both of those levels end up having 1.73 second interval in skill 2. Overall, I don't think a lot of you will deploy a 26 SP caster very early in the stage. The upgrades, which only brings initial mana increase, will become less significant the later you deploy Marcille, where her mana may just reach max naturally, so I'd recommend level 1 for most players, and level 3 may only be relevant for dedicated users and is only significant in extreme cases. For skills, my recommendation is skill 2 over skill 3 over skill 1. Skill 2 is a next-gen, fast startup AoE AFK skill with consistent slow and stun towards the main target, which keeps enemy in range and together for more damage, a skill competitive with logo skill 1. Skill 3 is a high DPS arts nuker skill with a large area stun and benefits the most from attack buffs. It can be split into individual casts, but the ease of use for this skill is greatly hindered by the chanting mechanic. Skill 1 is a damage and healing hybrid skill. Its damage is mediocre, but the high HPH healing has interesting applications, just not very practical for most players. And before talking about the skills, let's talk about the chanting mechanic found in all Marcille skills. Chanting, by the game's description, is the process of attempting to start the skill, but can be interrupted. This process is still considered off-skill by the game. Chanting is indicated by a light purple progress bar, and again, to even start chanting, Marcille needs to have enough mana specified by the skill itself, and this process can be interrupted by stun and freeze. The Cross's burst will take away mana and stops her from using the skill as well. The good news is, once she finishes chanting, she will no longer be affected by those statuses, and her mana will no longer go down from them as well. So, skill 1, after chanting for 2 seconds, activates the skill. Each attack consumes 2 mana, attack plus 140%. When no targets are available, heals allied operators instead. Skill can be deactivated anytime, 25 initial mana. Stats are as followed. With full mana, Marcille can do 40 attacks in skill, which can last up to 100 plus seconds. As a damage and healing hybrid, the damage aspect of this skill straight up is just mediocre. Don't even think about it. There exists a trick to do an auto attack, then start chanting immediately, do an attack in skill, stops the skill, where Marcille will immediately pick up another auto attack, rinse and repeat. This can increase her DPS, but honestly is a bit of an overkill for most players. For healing though, 1.1k HPS for 100 plus second is a standout. Do know that she's a single target medic when healing, so no splash AoE healing. It does prolong the survival of operators in some extreme circumstances, like healing Surta in skill 3, healing in the fire barrage of Tallulah, but in normal situations, it will often become an overkill. It also comes with two huge drawbacks even when you want to use her exclusively for healing. One, Marcille has a long attack interval, plus she's single target when healing, so she's not very good in dealing with multi-target damage or frequent tick damage. And two, her healing will turn to a pretty miserable damage whenever an enemy enters her range. I wouldn't say she's lucky that she has a short range, but that is a problem and can quickly murder her patient. The trick that I mentioned for damage also works to slightly shorten her attack interval. You just cancel and recast the skill over and over. Overall, the skill has some interesting concepts, but many times it's just awkward when you use it, and most of the time you may want to just use a medic. Not recommended. Skill 2, after chanting for 11 seconds, consume 35 mana to summon a familiar to attack. Attack plus 100% and attack slow all targets for 0.5 seconds. Skills can be activated again to upgrade the familiar, where she gets additionally attack range plus 1, attack speed plus 60, and attacks stuns the main target for 0.5 seconds. The skill has unlimited duration and can be deactivated anytime in the first use. 10 initial mana. Attack range in the second use of phase is the same as marksman, and DPS in the second phase is about 1480. So let's talk about skill 2, which I like to call it a 3A skill: Arts, AoE, and AFK. First of all, it comes with a decently fast startup. To save enough mana for entering the second use, Marcille only needs 35 plus 35 plus 1. The 1 is for keeping her talent 1 up, which is 71 mana. So it should be 36 seconds after the stage starts, and 21 seconds if you are rocking module level 3. And once she's deployed, she only needs about 23 seconds to fully warm up, which is 2 instances of 11 second chanting plus 1 second on her deployment where she can't use her skill yet, and that's very fast. Pro tips here. 1. Since you don't really need any mana beyond 71, you can learn to memorize the outline display pattern for Marcille's icon when she's at exactly 71 mana. My experience here is observing the top right of the progress bar when it's like 1 tick away from reaching the C mark. That's when it's at 71 mana. 2. The skill design also gives you a more flexible option of when to start the second use, so you can opt to hold the line with phase 1 for a little and find a better timing for the second chanting. So for damage, 1480 DPS. Let's do some comparison. Logo's skill 1 does 1650 normal and 2835 in necrosis burst, and comes with 10 resistance shred. Golden Glow skill 2, 1822 DPS and ignores 18 resistance. Those are single target DPS and comes with 60 second warm-ups. Fiala skill 2, 1108 DPS, ignores 10 resistance. Doesn't require warm-up. So Marcille's advantage is actually pretty clear. Her AoE fast warm-up is the key selling point. Yes, she costs a bit more than the others, but it only takes her half the time to set up. A cherry on top is her minor crowd controls that comes with the skill. She deals AoE slow against enemies hit, which is a good way to bundle up enemies for splash efficiency. We mentioned the similar principle with Wizardel. The consistent stun interrupt to the main target is great as well. It has a better stopping power to slow down isolated target and join them with others, and can interrupt enemies to alleviate the tanking pressure of melee units. And as an advanced application, since different skill levels give her different attack speed increased by the skill, it has an on-paper implication of stun interrupting enemies with different attack intervals. All in all, this skill gives a whole bunch of compensation for a splash caster by shortening her attack interval, giving her a bigger splash range with talent 1 that works alongside the minor crowd controls, and a bigger attack range, making it much more competitive. It's a super QOL 3A skill and is honestly on par with Logo's skill 1 as a next-gen AFK skill. They have different situations where one of them is better, but you can also consider using them together as well. And finally, we have skill 3. After chanting for 5 seconds, consume 8 mana to cast an explosion in front, dealing 390% attack as arch damage to all enemies in explosion range, shattering ranged tiles and stunning surrounding enemies for 4 seconds. Can chant for an additional 10 seconds, and after completion, consumes all remaining mana. For every 8 additional mana consumed, cast 1 additional explosion. Additional chanting can be stopped anytime, 40 initial mana. Numbers are shown here, 5.5k DPH for up to 10 casts at 55k total damage, and a whooping 12k DPS. Let's first clear up how exactly the skill works a little bit. On skill use, the normal chanting starts, and it will automatically proceed to the additional chanting once the normal part is done, during which the blast range is also visualized. During the additional chanting, if you cancel it anytime before it finishes, it will always cast just 1 explosion and consumes 8 mana. If you let it finish the whole 10 seconds, it will cast explosion at an interval of 0.45 seconds, each consuming 8 mana until there's less than 8. Retreating Marcille after finishing the additional chanting will cause her to lose all the mana regardless of how many explosions have occurred. So you probably would have realized by this point that this skill has no in-betweens. It's either 1 explosion each time or all out, which in my opinion is a huge shame and compromises her flexibility. So about the range, the explosion range is the same as Texas skill 2 but with a twist. Usually the center would be 2 tiles ahead of Marcille herself as shown in the diagram, but it can also move 1 tile closer to her when she's casting it next to stage boundaries. The damage pattern is dealing damage to all targets in the range, so strictly speaking it's no longer splash damage. For the stun, it will stun enemies in the surrounding 8 tiles of a ranged tile that's within the skill's explosion range. For the determination of ranged tiles, they are usually all the non-melee tiles and most of the stage boundaries and obstacles. Like we said in Ascalon's episode, if you think that's a ranged tile, it most likely is. For its applications, we're talking about 55k damage in just 4.5 seconds, so that's clearly a nuker skill, although she doesn't have that tag. There's no attack multipliers in this skill, so like Dagenbrecher, she gains considerably more from attack buffs. The stun lock here can prevent enemies affected from returning fire, but the bad thing here is that it also keeps enemies away from the blast if they are stunned outside of the range, so this is a double-edged sword unfortunately. I would call it the arts version of Dagenbrecher's skill 3, and it's for taking out a group of enemies fast or to deal with damage window bosses. People may speculate the potential application as a stun bomb and use the skill cast by cast, but the big problem behind that idea is the existence of a 2.9 second recovery animation after each cast. It's very noticeable and makes it extremely clunky. It brings down the stun coverage to just around 50%, which means it's barely enough even with a double CC time relic in IS. So doable, but definitely not the best choice. So unfortunately, I'll have to summarize with pointing out the limitations of the skill. The most fatal one among them has to be the 15 seconds of chanting before actual damage. Just imagine any normal skill that only starts to take effect 15 seconds after pressing the button. It makes it so much harder to time when the skill is supposed to be used for specific damage windows. After each complete use, it takes her 80 seconds off field to recharge, and there's no in-betweens to the damage pattern. You can opt to use just 3 explosions, then 2, then 5, no such option, it's only 1 or all. So at that point, I may as well just use Eyjafjallajökull skill 3, same hit and run, slower damage, yes, but no wind-ups and better damage quality. There's no arts shred, meaning a relatively low damage quality. We're looking at the Arknights game where we use Yi damage or true damage to bypass these damage window enemies with damage reductions, and she's not competitive at all at the moment. And finally, how the stun works on this skill just feels off. It's rigid, comes with a super long recovery animation out of nowhere. Overall, it would be a challenge and most likely a pain to use for many players, so be sure to use this skill for a little bit first, know how it performs, and see if it matches your playstyle before investing in it. In summary, Marcille is a 6-star splash caster where again they try to give her something extra beyond what the archetype can do. She has a special mana mechanic that bypasses one side of the SP system while also being handicapped by the flip side. But overall, like we said, the mana system is a beneficial mechanic. However, that advantage is largely undone by the coexisting chanting mechanic. Theoretically, Marcille has very flexible skill startups, but having to chant before activating the skill is just prolonging her startup once again. Her kit tries to integrate different abilities to broaden the application of her being a splash caster, but interestingly, her skill 2 ends up being the most versatile skill, which is the one that plays to the strength of splash casters most. Honorable mention to her skill 3 with Art's burst damage, but honestly, it's butchered by the 15-second chanting. For performance in common events, if you are an AFK enjoyer, don't miss out on this one. You may not see a lot of guys using her skill 2, and that's because she's a limited operator, but her skill 2 is indeed impressive in mob-wave situations. She's also used to work with buffs or debuffs to nuke damage window enemies, but personally speaking, it's much harder to pull off than using Dragon Branch's skill 3. You need a future sight of 15 seconds to get the timing right, and that's basically it. She's been a bit quiet after her release. At the final verdict, my daily rating for her is 7. It's mostly about her skill 2, obviously. The off-field mana regen makes sense, making use of all the time where you deploy vanguards and setup, and when you have enough DP for her, she's basically ready as well. It has a fast startup, as long as you get through the 22 seconds of chanting. We've also gone over all the merits of the skill already, which contributes a lot to its effectiveness. For Advanced, my final rating is 4. Her best shot at Advanced content would be the AoE burst arts damage and the stun interruptions. The crowd control part of the kit can work with relics, but that's more for the runs that you are poor on damage, which isn't all that common anymore in IS-5. If you want to nuke enemies like the Sentinel in IS-4, you'll need quite the trials and errors, which can cost you games. Skill 3 with buffs may be a way to take out some key enemies, but not only does she need to compete with logos as a key damage dealer, she's also seeing competition from Blaze Altar, which when combined with a burn enabler can also deal a considerable amount of burst damage, with the better quality of E damage as well. All those factors combined, I'm not seeing a very promising future for Marcille in advanced content. For numbers, I think most parts of it are pretty fine, other than the notoriously long chantings. So for pool analysis, key takeaway here is that her AFK friendliness and the true limited nature should be the pluses. The mana mechanic, like it or hate it, it's dependent on your favorite playstyle. Just to make sure you can live with the chanting. I'm just gonna let the slides play. The points here are quite extensively laid out already. I wish you all good luck on the banner, and like with R6, you'll never know if these kind of characters will rerun, so catch it while you can. On a side note, Chilchuck is a pretty busted 5-star agent and is used in the Mask Risk 7-Ops roster for CCB 3, so plan accordingly. That's it for this episode. Thank you again for watching. I'll be looking into the module updates soon, so stay tuned for those contents. I hope you enjoy the content. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe. See you in the next one. Bye bye.